supposed to take a picture. Okay, it's now 4:30. We'll get started. Today, first of all, do we have any questions about the readings of anything? I know I have one question, so let me give you a microphone to ask your question.
Okay, so in one part of the reading, there was a chart which gave you the different kinds of deictic references.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there were epithets, there were definite descriptions, and there was...
In this reading?
Yes,
okay.
in this reading. And under the one for epithets, their example was, I think, the idiot. And there was a footnote saying, so long as the idiot is not categorically an idiot. Something like that. So I was wondering what the boundaries of an epithet are. So once you're categorically an idiot, does that become definite description or something else?
Well, in this case, what they mean is when they say it's to refer to someone who's not categorically an idiot, means it's not a descriptive term. So you can't say that you identify the person as the idiot by the description of idiot. You have to know that person's name is the idiot. So that's what's the difference in that when it's anaphoric. So in this case, you have to know it refers to the same referent that they were talking about somewhere else. So it's like, John came over yesterday and the idiot, left his car running. So there, the idiot is used anaphorically to refer to John. It's not that John is categorically an idiot. It's just that he did something stupid, and in that context, we can call him an idiot. So that's what they mean by that. Yeah, good. So that's the table on page 25. If for those who have read it, if you want, I can show. Anytime you have a question like that, actually, I could show it up here if people think it's necessary. But that's good to ask questions. Please do ask questions. There's also the reading my paper. Thanks. My paper, the 2015 paper, which is has a lot of controversial stuff in it. So if you have any comments or questions, you can bring those up too. Either during the lecture is fine with me, but also during Tuesday is more like a tutorial type of thing, so we can spend even more time with questions on Tuesdays. Any more comments or questions right now? Okay. So today, what we're going to move to, as we just kind of had a hint of, is Dijksys and anaphora. So with Dijksys, it's really about pointing at something that you're talking about. And it's something to do with your immediate speech situation. In other words, who you're talking with, who's talking, who that person is talking with, the time that they're speaking, the place that they're speaking, all of these kind of issues, because language developed in very small communities where people were all kind of in the same place, working together. And so these deictic elements are actually really important, especially in the early development of language. As language communities got bigger, we find that there's actually a correlation between the size of language communities and the complexity of the culture and the loss of certain, or the, not so much loss, but the more simpler deictic systems. And I'll give you some examples of how that works. But let's just get through the basic idea first. So I got everything's running. This is on, everything's on. Today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you. I'm sure, hopefully you've all read Dr. Seuss. You didn't have a deprived childhood where you didn't get to read Dr. Seuss, because everybody should read Dr. Seuss. So one of the things that Dr. Seuss does a lot is play with language. And so in this case, who is the you he's talking to? Who is you?
The
Yeah, well, basically any reader, right? Any writer. So you doesn't have a real specific reference. It's just anybody that he's talking to, right? In this case. But then what does he say that you are you? No one who there is no one alive who is youer than you. So what does it mean to be youer than you? Or if you are you, what does it mean to be you? If the original you didn't refer to any individual, what does the other you refer to? This is how he likes to play with language. Okay, think about that. Let's look at some other examples. This is from the New York Times, a cooking blog. And he's talking about, how to cook things. And then he says, oh, you can do this or you can do that. And he says, oh, you can do doughfour, served it with spaghetti, spatzel. You do you. In other words, you do it. What does it mean to say you do you, right? But that's totally grammatical to say you do you, and totally understandable. But why? What is you? What is the you referring to? Is it the same you as in Dr. Seuss's you, or is it something different? How do you interpret both of those yous, right? So this is what Dijksys is what we're going to be talking about. How do you understand who these yous refer to? In the movie Up in the Air, I don't know if you've seen this, George Clooney, the guy that looks like me. He, in my dreams at least, he was this crazy guy who he doesn't live anywhere, he just kind of flies around. His job involves going to places all over the place. So he flies around the country all the time, and he has collected so many frequent flyer miles, he gets to this 10 million mile mark, right? And when you've collected 10 million frequent flyer miles, you get all kinds of super benefits. You get a gift of like 2 million extra miles or something, or then you get one of the perks that he gets is to be able to meet the senior pilot of the pilot he's on at the time that he passes the 10 million mile mark. So in the movie, when he hits that milestone, the pilot comes back from the cockpit and sits down with him and starts talking to him. And so the thing that George Clooney says to him is, I always thought about what I would say to you when I met you. Now there are two different yous in here, and they're not the same you at all, right? So if I haven't met you yet, how do I know it's you, right? So when he's talking about what I want to say to you now is the you, is the person sitting next to him possibly, but the other you is just some abstract pilot. It's not this you, somebody else, or somebody, a general sense of you is as pilot. So again, it's an interesting thing where we can play with the thing. Now, most people, of course, don't pay attention to this, but as linguists, we're kind of crazy. So we're supposed to pay attention to these things. And we want to think about, all right, how is it that we understand these things when they are used in such strange ways? And sometimes, of course, there's just simple ambiguity, like this one from a cartoon Piled Higher and Deeper. This is about graduate students. So these cuts to our budget are very serious matter. Now, some of you may be wondering, how will this affect me? Is my job secure? So here, when they're doing that, me, what does the me refer to? Or what do you think the students are thinking the me refers to? Themselves, right? But then he says, to which I can only say, don't worry, I'll be fine. All the rest of you, on the other hand, may be in trouble, kind of thing. So here we see the ambiguity of me. When he says me, he could be me referring to them. He could be referring to himself, though. And so how do we know which me he's referring to in any context? As a friend of mine, who's also a linguist, a very clever linguist, one time on Facebook, a friend of his wrote to him and said, you weren't here. Where the hell were you, man? You weren't here. And Simon, being a linguist and understanding Dijksys, said, I've been here all the time. Right? So he wasn't wrong. Simon is not wrong, but what's going on here, right? So here, yeah, what is going on here with here? Because, again, here can have lots of different meanings. This is another deictic term. So we have like the personal pronouns like I and me and you, And then also here, there, all of these are deictic, where they point to something, but what do they point to? How do we know what they point to? So in this case, when he says here, what place is he pointing to? What is the friend pointing to? And what is he pointing to? Even though they're using the same word, they're pointing to different places. In this cartoon, is your time machine working, Jeffrey? Yes, it is. Great. I want to go on a trip. Okay. When do you want to go? Right now. But you're already there. Where? Not where. When? Right now is now. And then she gets angry and says, this is why I hate talking to geeky science boys. Sometimes it's just too easy. So here we have time words like now and when, but especially here he's talking about now. Now is now. So now is another word that changes all the time. So these words, these deictic words, are often called shifters because they're constantly shifting in their meaning. And so you may, when you read the literature, you may hear them called shifters. Because if I say, okay, I'm talking to you right now, now I'm talking to you right now, there's the two different nows, right? And I'm here, but now I'm here. And now I'm here, right? So the meaning has changed in each time. So these are shifting their meaning depending on this place, the time of the speaking, the place of the speaking, and who's doing the speaking, and who you're talking to. So and it also is things like this and that. So in this one, he says, I still want to know why the Pentagon wants to know how people to get. I still want to know why the Pentagon wants to know how to get people to another solar system. Maybe, and the alien here says, maybe they spotted the Annihilator. And he says, what's that? It's a comet, planet-killing comet heading here, and only the military has the resources to secretly evacuate all of the VIPs and their families before it hits. But we won't. But don't worry, we won't let that happen. And they say, phew. So they're relieved. But then they think, okay, they use the word that here. So what does the that refer to? So then they ask, wait, not let what happen? The comet strike or the VIP evacuation? And the alien just says, oh, whoa, look at the time, gotta go. And so doesn't explain which that was being referred to. So we have the same problem with this and that. They can refer to lots of different things. And how do you know what they're supposed to refer to? What is the mechanism that you use to understand? One time, I was going to a meeting. When I worked in Australia, we had a kind of, it was a bunch of us who generally were involved in all of the administrative things. And so we'd have lots of meetings on different things, but it was always the same people. So one time I walked into a meeting and I said, oh, round up the usual suspects. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched Casablanca. It was a big shock to me to find that some people in this generation have not watched Casablanca. That's also a deprived childhood if you haven't seen Casablanca. But anyway, so this is a very famous line from the movie Casablanca, round up the usual suspects. So I walked in the room and I said, round up the usual suspects. And this woman, Felicity, said, I almost bought that for $15 downstairs, right? So she recognized it as a reference to Casablanca, the movie. And then you have to know, in order to understand this, you have to know that this meeting was on a Thursday afternoon. On Thursday afternoons, we had like a flea market down below this building that we were having a meeting in. And so when she said, I almost bought that for $15 downstairs, what she was referring to and expected me to understand was a DVD of the movie Casablanca at the flea market. So here, you have this, unless you have like a lot of information that you can bring to bear to it, how do you understand something like this? If it was somebody else that didn't have all this extra information, that it was from Casablanca, that there is a DVD of Casablanca, and it's often sold in these flea markets, and the flea market happened to be running today, and she could have bought that for $15. Hey, why did this go that way? So all of this information had to be available to her in order to make sense of that, or to me, in order to make sense of that, what she meant by that. And I had no trouble at all. having, been there a long time. Then you have Siri. If you ask Siri, what's your favorite app? She'll say that one. No, that one. Or maybe that one. Yeah, that one. So again, this is basically Siri not answering. Siri does a lot of this not answering type of stuff because the that can refer to anything, right? So in this case, she's playing on the fact that can refer to anything, or basically, in this context, saying anything, it could mean nothing, right? So these are very tricky words. And then here's another one where Donald says, I'm going to the auto repair shop and give those guys a piece of my mind. I'll be back in a minute. And he yells at the repairman, you said my car would be ready yesterday. And the guy says, when's the last time you brought your car into a shop and somebody told you it would be ready yesterday? What I said was, it'll be ready today, right? Well, yes, but, here it is. It's today, and the car's ready. Would we lie to you? What's going on here, right? So yesterday and today are also deictic terms because they change all the time. They are also relevant to the time of speaking. So today is the day of the speaking, and yesterday is the day before the time of speaking. And tomorrow is the day after speaking, the day of speaking. So these things are all relative like that. And again, it's tricky. So you can, again, play with it as they do here in this cartoon. And this is just another example of the ambiguity of this, where Zero is famously very dumb. So the sergeant says, don't just stand there, Zero, get going. If you don't get going, you're going to get this. And then Zero looks in his hand and he says, what do I get? There's nothing in there. In other words, he doesn't understand that this means the fist in his face or something, rather than something in the fist. So these words have this kind of problem. There's also tense. Tense is also deictic. So in English and other languages that have tense marking, it's also relative to the time of speaking. So present, past, and future is based on the time of speaking. Now, what's interesting sometimes, though, is how you interpret it. So like in this cartoon, I saw a cat up on the roof, and she says, oh my goodness, Pumpkin saw a cat on the roof. Gosh, I'll go get a ladder. I'll go call the fire department. And then he says, of course, that was about a year ago. So when somebody says something like, I saw a cat up on the roof, even though it's past tense, they would often assume it's very recent past tense. So this is one of the problems with us is how do you interpret even something like that, past tense and future tense, how far in the past, how far in the future. Some languages cut this up. So as I mentioned in my lecture last time, Rawang has 4 different past tenses. So they make this a little bit more explicit. But English just has 1 past tense. And so I saw a cat up on the roof could be a year ago, it could be 10 minutes ago. But she understands that it's 10 minutes ago because it is not constrained that way. This is from my brother. If you notice the date, November 10th, 2016. And before this, the messages before this were all about him trying to get me to go to his place for Thanksgiving, right? He lives in upstate New York. And so he was trying to get me to go to his place, and I didn't want to go. But then on November 10th, I get this message, and it says, well, I didn't see that coming. You may be seeing us for Christmas, LOL. What do you think that was there? Keep in mind the date. The presidential election in 2016. A lot of my friends are like, how do I get out of here now? It's like, we're leaving. Okay, Trump has been elected. We're leaving the U.S. The portal to apply for Canadian citizenship would crash. There's so many people applied for it. So here, again, that you kind of have to know all of this contextual information, what we had been talking about before, the date, and all this other stuff to understand what he was saying. So you may be seeing us for Christmas, like we may be getting out of here. Here's a cute use of now. This is the first time I've seen it used that way. How early? Now early. So that, it seems like a weird thing to say, but you can say that. Why not? Now early just means like right now, I guess, which is pretty early in most ways of thinking, I guess. Okay, so this is all about Dijksys, which just is the Greek word for pointing. And it's the same word as index. If you know index, like index finger, the reason why we call this an index finger is because we use it to point at things. And the reason why the back of a book has something called an index, or this one doesn't have an index. Oh yeah, this has an author index. The reason why this is called an index is because it points to where in the book these things appear. Right? So index and Dijksys are just two different words for pointing. And that's what we're going to be talking about, because these things are said to point to something in the speech situation. So they either point to the time, to the people, to the place. What else? Basically those three things. But we'll talk more about the details. So sometimes it's called deictic expressions, or just deictics, or indexical expressions, or indexicals. Green distinguishes between deictic indexicals and anaphoric indexicals, but this is not a common usage. Normally we think of anaphor as something very different from Dijksys, because it's not really deictic in the sense of, it points to something, but it points to something in a very different way. It doesn't have to be tied to the speech act. It's just tied to the speech act only in the sense that it's within the same discourse. So anaphora basically just referring to the same referent twice, whereas indexicals are referring to something using something in the speech act situation to refer to it. So it's very different, deictic and anaphoric. I'll give you more examples if that wasn't clear. These include any linguistic element whose interpretation necessarily makes reference to properties of the extralinguistic context in which they occur. That is, an element that the speaker uses to refer to some aspect of the context. So when I say this, then you know that it's something near the speaker. When I say that, you know it's something away from the speaker. If I say yesterday, then you know it's the day before I'm talking. If I say tomorrow, then it's the day after I'm talking. If I say here, no, I already said here and there. Yeah, I know here and there. So if I say there, it means away from where I am right now. But if I say here, it's where I am right now. So all of these things are understood by reference to where the speaker is, what time the speaker is speaking, where, who the speaker is speaking to. So it's not only the speaker, him or herself, but also the you that the person is speaking to. So you is also deictic, the second person. And so this is what we mean by some aspect of the context, either the time of the speaking, the person's being involved in the speech act, or the place of the speaking. They are the most obvious way in which the relationship between language and context is reflected in the structures of languages themselves. So this is how we can see that language really developed in a face-to-face situation. So written language is not primary at all. It's really the face-to-face language that is more primary. And the relationship between language and context is extremely important. So they include demonstratives like this and that, or pronouns like I and you, tense aspect, not aspect, somehow I got a mistake there. Tense marking, not aspect marking. Aspect is not deictic. And can also include definite descriptions and many other types of expressions when they're used in particular ways. The essential categories of information expressed by traditional deictics are person, this relative to the speaker and addressee. I'm just repeating again what I said a little more simply before. Spatial location relative to the speaker and possibly the hearer. So in some languages you say like in Japanese, there's a three-way distinction between near the speaker, near the addressee, and far from both. So sometimes there's also spatial location relative to the hearer as well as to the speaker. Temporal location, the time relative to the time of the utterance, which can be marked in tense or can be marked in adverbs like yesterday and tomorrow. Green says that more than, quoting Bar Hillel, one of the first people to talk about Dijksys in the literature, she says more than 90% of the declarative sentences people utter are indexical, in that, at least in English, in that they involve implicit references to the speaker, addressee, time or place of utterance in expressions like first or second person pronouns, demonstratives, tenses, and adverbs like here, now, and yesterday. So basically, Dijksys is a really core aspect of what we do. And so if we want to understand the creation of meaning, we have to understand, how do we understand these things? How do we use them? How do we understand them? It's a really basic problem. And it was actually the origin of the whole study of pragmatics, because it was the most obvious thing that people had a hard time kind of nailing down. And so they understood that it was based on context and use. So that's kind of opened the door to a lot of other pragmatic studies. So in English, almost every sentence includes a deictic component, including the tense. So like, there is a man in my office, there was a man in my office. You not only have the my, which is, refers to the speaker, there, and there here, actually, this one, I probably shouldn't have used this example. This there is not deictic. This is actually just a dummy subject, because English requires a subject. If I wanted to have a deictic there, like instead of using my office, if I wanted to say there is a man there, then I have to put another there, which the second there would then be deictic. But this there is just a dummy. It's like it. Like it's raining. That's just a dummy subject. Just because English has this, penchant for having a subject in every sentence. So when there isn't one, you make one up. You just put in a dummy. They're a dummy. They're not dumb. They're just like a whole placeholder. So you have the is, was, is deictic, and then the my is deictic as well. So Dijksys, as I mentioned, is a reflection of the fact that natural languages are primarily designed for face-to-face interactions, because if you move away from this, from the face-to-face interaction, the communication often breaks down. So if you look at, a lot of people do this kind of thing, they'll make a sign that say, oh, I'll be back in an hour. Now, if you don't say when the hour started, how do you know when the hour is going to be over, right? If you see somebody, I see this all the time, people put on their door, I'll be back in 10 minutes, or I'll be back in an hour. That's totally useless, because the Dijksys breaks down when you say, when you don't know when it started. If you put down a time, if they wrote down the time, okay, I left at 6:20, and then I'll be back in 20 minutes, then okay, they'll be back at 6:40. But if they just, you don't tell you when they left, you don't know if they left 5 minutes ago or an hour ago, so you don't know whether you should wait or what, So this is how not being in a face-to-face situation, not knowing when they wrote this is the key issue here. Why they don't know when they wrote this, so then that breaks down. So, and then of course writing generally, if you read writing, then they have to use less deictic stuff, because you're not assuming the reader has access to what you're doing at the time that you write it, and also if you have a more complex society where people don't know each other, people you don't know, or you're interacting with people you don't know, then there's a lot of information that you don't share, and so some of those examples, for example, that I gave you, you may not be able to understand because you don't have that background knowledge. And so this is another issue that when we see societies go from small, tight-knit communities to very open societies where lots of strangers are interacting, then you see a change in this deictic elements. And I'll give you an example when we get to pronouns. So the use of deictic expressions can be divided into gestural, symbolic, and anaphoric uses. So here's some examples using there. So if I'm pointing at something, I say, oh, I want you to put it there. Symbolic is really the same thing as gestural, it's just without the pointing itself, the physical pointing. So if you say, is Johnny there, where I mean there where you are. So you just need to know the location of the participants, who the participants are, as in you can come with me if you like. Or when the speech event is taking place, you can't take a vacation this year. So this year is also deictic. So, and anaphoric is when you're just basically referring to the same thing twice. Now, the problem with anaphor is that some anaphor, you can have, and this is what Green was really talking about, I think, with the anaphoric indexicals, is that you can have some anaphors that are also indexical words. So like, I drove the car to the parking lot and left it there, where the there refers to, it's an anaphor meaning parking lot, but that's how you understand what there refers to is anaphorically, but at the same time, you know that by using there, she's not at the parking lot. So if she had said, I drove the car to the parking lot and left it here, well, that's a little bit difficult to say, but the idea is that the there here does contrast still with here to tell the hearer that the parking lot is somewhere away from the speaker. Terms can also be used symbolically and anaphorically at the same time, as in, I was born in London and have lived there ever since, kind of like that. And where there refers to London, but also contrasts to here, just as in the last example. And then gestural and anaphoric, I could say, I cut a finger, this one, where I'm pointing at it, but it's also anaphoric to the finger, the one here I'm talking about. This, when I say this one. The difference between gestural and symbolic is minor. It's just whether the referent is specifically being pointed to, as in using a gesture or not. So here's some more examples using other words like, so you. So if I'm like saying, talking to you guys and I say you, and you, come over here. So that's 3 different yous, right? You can do that without any difficulty. And what did you say? You can never tell what sex they are now these days. So the B example is non-dyctic. The B example is symbolic. The C example is non-dyctic. So when you say you can never tell what sex they are nowadays, the you here is non-dyctic, means it doesn't refer to anybody. So we sometimes use pronouns that way to not refer to anyone. You never know what's going to happen next. That's a common expression. You never know. That you doesn't refer to any specific person. Or this finger hurts, I can point to it, or I could say this city is very nice. Or I met this weird guy the other day, where this weird guy doesn't really refer specifically to something that the hearer can identify, but what it's, we'll talk about this later in the course. This allows us to anchor the referent there to the discourse situation, so that then we can talk about him. So it's not really specific to that guy. So push, not now, but now. Or let's go now rather than tomorrow. And now, that's not what I said. So here, now is also used non-deictically, just as a kind of discourse particle. Now, don't worry about it, Now, don't get riled up. Now, let's see what we're going to do. All of those nows are not deictic. Those are just nows. Now what? So not that one, idiot, that one. So it's pointing. Or that's a beautiful view, if you're looking at a Zoom picture or something. Oh, I did this and that. So when we say this and that, it just means I did a bunch of different things. It's not pointing to anything in specific. Move it from there to there. That's specific. Pointing. Hello, is Harry there? You're calling somebody on the phone. That's symbolic. But then we also have expressions like, there we go, or there's a bug on the floor. The there, those are non-deictic there. Okay, so now to get a little bit more in depth in person Dijksys, we're going to do person and space, place, and so. So this one, person Dijksys, or social Dijksys, it's sometimes called, is the role of participants in the speech act. So it's basically the first person and second person in the speech act. The first person is the grammaticalization, most often by pronouns, of the speaker's reference to himself or herself. So this could be, it doesn't have to be a pronoun. In a lot of languages, you use words other than pronouns. You use a word like slave, or you use a word like, what are some of the others? Like in Thai, there's about 25 different ways you can refer to yourself, depending on who you're talking to. So second person is the grammaticalization of the speaker's reference to one or more addressees. And so this can be in the form of a pronoun, or it can be in the form of a title. It can be in the form of the person's name, a number of different ways. Third person, in some languages, it's not really deictic. It's the grammaticalization of the speaker's reference to persons or entities which are not speakers or addressees. So they're really not tied to the speech act situation. But they often develop out of deictic pronouns. So in many languages, the third person pronouns actually derive from deictic pronouns. Like in Latin, the il and el in French, for example, come from the Latin deictic pronouns. Languages vary as to how many numbers and whether inclusive, exclusive, or sex is grammaticalized, and I'll give you examples of these. Social Dijksys also involves the grammaticalization of social distinctions, such as class or rank. So many of you may be familiar with the honorifics of Japanese or Javanese. These are a good example, but sometimes it's just simply a choice of pronouns, like in French, tu versus vous, or in Chinese, ni versus nin. And languages can grammaticalize person marking as independent words, clitics, or simply an inflectional affix. So there are lots of ways that you can constrain the interpretation of who you're talking to. It doesn't have to be a pronoun. It's also good to point out that aside from the deictic use of pronouns, they can be used non-deictically, as in the examples I gave you earlier, like when you're hot, where the you doesn't really refer to anybody. Terms of address can also be used deictically. So like in Chinese, traditionally, people, when they would address a teacher, they would just call them 老师, or in some places they call the teacher 车, 车, something, I have a question, So that's actually the same kind of thing. You can also use ni or nin, or sometimes together, or 教授. A lot of times when I'm in China, they'll call me 教授. 教授请坐这边, professor, please sit here, So like in this one, they use both together. This is, for those of you who can read Chinese, this is 教授, professor, and then nin, the polite form. So this person is trying to be very polite by referring to me twice with two kind of polite deictic terms. And in Japanese, as I mentioned, you have 5 different levels of politeness, depending on who you are talking to. So this is how Dijksys is related to the speech act situation, in that, like in Japanese, you have to know who you're talking to. You have to know your relative status compared to that person, so that you use the right level of politeness. It's called politeness, but it's just appropriateness for your social status as compared to the other person's social status. And it's not an accident that these kind of correspond with the caste system that was traditional in Java. And this is one of the reasons why it was not chosen as the national language. They took Bazar Malay and made it into Indonesian, rather than try to use a complex language like this. They took a simple Creole and made it into the national language. The first person plays the key role, as the deictic center most commonly involves the speaker. The deictic center is the part where everything is relative to that. We call that the deictic center. Now, most of the time it's the speaker, but it can be others. And I'll give you examples, relativized Dijksys, and also sometimes for politeness, we take the hearer's point of view as the deictic center. But mostly it's the first person that is at the deictic center, and the speaker is the central person, the time of the speaker as the central time, the time the speaker produces the utterance as the central time, the speaker's location at the time of the utterance as the central location, the point in the discourse where the speaker is and his utterance as the discourse center, and the speaker's social rank and status as the social center. So all of these things kind of come together, and these all affect how you speak in that situation. But we can have changes in the deictic center as using deictic projection or shifting the point of view. And I'll give you examples. The first person non-singular forms in a language may distinguish between including the addressee, what we call inclusive pronouns, and not including the addressee. So if you speak Chinese, then you know that there's a 我 versus 咱们, or 我们 versus 咱们, if you speak Northern Chinese at least. So there's a distinction between us not including the speaker, the hearer. There's us not including the hearer, and then us including the hearer. And many languages do this to a great extent. They not only have it in plural, but they have it in dual and trial. And I'll give you examples. So in terms of number, also most languages seem to have a difference between I and we, except Old Chinese. But some languages also have a dual, inclusive and exclusive, a trial, which means 3 people, inclusive and exclusive, and plural, which is kind of a lot. So there's even some where they have 4. Plural and exclusive, as in Fijian, subject pronouns, and in Dulong. So like in Fijian, you have one singular, ao, one dual inclusive. So if you have, I'm talking to one person, and then the 2 of us are going to do something together, then you use that pronoun. But if it's one dual exclusive, that means there's 2 of us, not the speaker, who are going to do something together. Not the hearer, I mean, who are going to do something together. And then trial means there's 3 of us, inclusive, so including the person we're talking to, or 3 of us not including the person we're talking to, or plural, including the person we're talking to, or plural, not including the person we're talking to. And then Dulong is a language I worked on in Yunnan in China. And they have the singular and then a dual inclusive, a dual exclusive, a plural inclusive, and a plural exclusive. So languages can cut it up in different ways. It depends, again, it goes back to, as I talked about last time, how much the language wants to constrain the interpretation of these distinctions, right? So do you care about this? Like in Old Chinese, 我 was not singular. It could be singular, could be plural. So it was just a first person pronoun without really being particular about the same with qi and a lot of other pronouns that were used in Old Chinese. They didn't really constrain the number of people involved, whereas now it's developed into a singular pronoun. 我 has developed into a singular pronoun. So so languages decide, how much of these distinctions they want to make and how they want to make them. So they may do it in different, they may have the same, a really large number of distinctions like this, or a small number of distinctions like Chinese. It's up to them. If there's a difference in the number of distinctions made between the first and second person pronouns in the language, more distinctions will be made in the first person pronoun than in the second person pronoun. So we can see this like with English you, although there are specific reasons why we only have one second person form. We don't have a singular anymore. I mentioned that last time that we lost the thou and only have you now for most of them, although we're starting to develop in some dialects a plural form, and you is becoming just singular. But there is this cross-linguistic regularity that generally the first-person pronouns make more distinction than the second-person pronouns. And third-person pronouns are often treated very differently in grammatical systems of the world because they are not part of the speech act, really. They are something other than the speaker and hearer. That's why they're often just derived from words for that or this. Like in Chinese, in Old Chinese, there is no real, there's a third-person object pronoun, 知, and there's a third-person possessive pronoun, qi, but there's no general topic pronoun for, like we would think of him, he, or it type of thing. But what developed into a third-person pronoun in Chinese, 他, actually comes from a word, or is a word still, meaning other. It just means other than the speaker and hearer. It means other person. So we still say 其他. 其他 involves the genitive pronoun qi, and then ta, which literally, if you take qi ta, it means other than that one's. Other than that other person we just mentioned, or something like that. So you say qi ta. So the ta there doesn't mean third person singular, it means other. And that was the original use of ta. In like tarin, you can still say tarin, meaning other people. So that shows you that the third person pronoun is really, even in their own way of thinking, is something other than the speech act participants. So the pronouns, the first person pronoun and second person pronoun in Old Chinese can be reconstructed back thousands of years, and also are cognate with pronouns in Tibetan and Burmese and a lot of the other languages that we can reconstruct to what we call Proto-Sino-Tibetan. So those pronouns go way back, but the third person pronouns are not like that at all. Third person pronouns were kind of an afterthought in almost all the languages. And as I said, they often develop late as just demonstrative pronouns. So these are quite different. So one interesting fact about third-person forms is that if a language distinguishes gender at all, it will be in the third forms, like in English, he, she, and it. And only then is it possible in the second, and only possible in the first, and then only possible. Thai, for example, uses different pronouns for different sexes and statuses, depending on whether you're male, female, and whether your status, or whether you're talking to a monk, or you're talking to the king, or you will use different pronouns. So it's quite a few different ones. And generally, there are fewer gender differences in the plural, like in English, they versus he, she, and it in the singular. And I'm not really going to get into this, but I don't know how many of you are aware of what's happening in the U.S. with the pronouns, the gendered pronouns in America, but they've become very loaded. So now people, if you see people signing letters and stuff, they will often, or identifying themselves in some way, they will often put their pronouns after their name. So you say, so like I would say, like Randy LaPola, parentheses, he, him, just to show that I think of myself as a male, and I like to be called he or him. But there are other people who like to be called either she, her, or they like to be called they. They don't want to be called either he or she or anything. So these things have kind of developed another societal meaning, which is still developing in some ways. But it's there's been a lot of writing about this lately, this kind of trying to get over the genderness of, somehow there are people that see our use of these gendered pronouns as problematic, so they're trying to get beyond that. Now, some languages do things quite differently. In Tagalog, you also have something that's quite interesting in the sense of being, you have first-person singular and dual, and first-person inclusive and exclusive, but they also develop, they have three sets of pronouns which involve topic versus non-topic versus oblique. So some languages do this. In Tagalog, the topic is actually a grammatical kind of status, and non-topic is also a grammatical kind of status. So it helps you to distinguish who you're talking about, because the topic one is the one you're talking about, and so that's marked morphologically. But then you also have these inclusive and exclusive forms. The one dual is interesting, the kita. I'll give you some examples. So like sumalat ako, I wrote, sinulatan ako ng liham. So you can, you have here is topic pronoun, here it's the non-topic pronoun. Ikaw is a special second person form that's used only when it's the focus in predicate position. So in initial position, ikaw ang teacher ko, you are my teacher. And then you have, for second person, you have ka, the non-topic, the topical non-focus form. So you have three forms for second person. You have the focal form, the non-focal topic, and the non-topical form. So it's quite a complex system. And then you have kita, which is interesting. It's kind of a combined form, which means it was originally a dual, but it actually is now used to just mean I do something to you. So like you say, magkaibigan kita, you and I are friends, or mahal kita, I love you, where it seems like there's only one pronoun, but it actually means I to you, which is different from the Malay use of it. So like, bibigyan kita ng pera, I will give you money. And you can also, in Tagalog, probably because of the Spanish influence, you can also use the plural to be more polite to somebody. So if you're talking to somebody who's older, they're very respectful of elders in the Philippines. And so they also have this mano po, where they kiss the hand kind of thing, or you touch the hand to the forehead. And I think that's also from the Spanish, especially since the name is mano, which means hand in Spanish. And this one I think probably also, but you can use the plural second person form or even the third person plural form out of respect. So like European languages. And they have the demonstrative pronouns were originally, it's now being lost a little bit, the fourth type, but they originally had 4 different degrees. So nearest the speaker, near the speaker and the addressee, nearest the addressee, and then remote from both. So now some of these forms are getting kind of reduced, but so ire and are are kind of disappearing from the vocabulary, and we just use ito for a lot of them. Ano ito? What is this? Sino ang lalaking yun? So I'll give you some examples. Now, here's a complicated example of a language that really expresses or really shows us how these deictic terms, things like how you call each other, really relate to this type of society that you live in. So Onya Darat in Indonesia, they have personal pronouns that are marked for generational affiliation. So singular is marked for same or younger or older, younger versus older generation. Dual plural is marked for same versus different generation. So, so this is, so you look at here in this land dialect, the Tamak, and that's where they're spoken. And then they will have these forms where you have this, this singular form, which you have these different markers here, which means it's less or equal to the same generation, less or equal to the same generation. Then you would use this EO form, the same younger generation, the same or younger generation than the speaker. If it's if the singular is older than the speaker, then you use ito. If they're the same generation, then you use dodo. If they are not the same, then you use dama. If for the plural, if they are the same, you use dien. And if they're not the same, then you use denak. So, so if a woman is talking about her granddaughter and her great-granddaughter, she has to say damak, they meaning dual. If she's talking about, because that's the plural, that's the 2 different generations. If she's talking about her 2 granddaughters, then she says dudo, because that's the same generation. Those 2 are the same generation. And a system like this can only work in a society where everybody knows everybody else. The generation does not necessarily match with age, because like if you know Chinese society, your beifen, your age, your generation name or your generation doesn't necessarily correlate with your age. And the same thing, you know, sometimes even in the West, like your uncle may be younger than you. So his beifen, I mean his generation will be higher even if he's younger. So in this case also, the generation doesn't necessarily match with the age, so your nephew might be older than you. And a speaker has to know the generational affiliation of absolutely everybody in the community to be able to use the correct pronoun. Now this used to work really well because everybody lived in one big longhouse, right? So the village basically was just one longhouse. And so you have up to 60 families. And crucially, all the inhabitants of the village lived in the same house and knew each other intimately. So something like that, this system could work because everybody knew everybody else and knew their relationship to that other person. But this system is now breaking down because of modernization. There are people living in their own houses. There's, you know, a much more complex type of settlements. And so now you are talking to people you don't know, so then they have to switch to something more like a Malay type of system, a Bazar Malay type of system of simple pronouns. Now, some languages also have a fourth category of person. So aside from first, second, and third category, third person, they have a fourth. It's often called this. I don't know if you really want to call it fourth, but it's just what it's called in the literature. So within the third person pronouns, basically you have a distal and approximative. In other words, you have one that's kind of considered closer to the speaker and one that's considered farther away from the speaker, right? So the distal means farther away or obviative. The proximal or proximate is the one that's closer. Proximal means close, right? And these are used for a variety of things, as in Navajo, so you can use it for talking about, to help you, when you're talking about like several reference, you can distinguish, you set one as the proximate and the others as distal. So the key, the one that you want to most pay attention to, you mark as the proximate one. Generally, only one participant in a stretch of discourse can be marked as proximate, and all the rest will be obviative. So here's an example from Kootenai, a language from British Columbia in Canada. This is a story from chickadee, frog, and wolf. Chickadee is assigned proximate status, while wolf is assigned obviate status. So he would tell wolf that he wore out his moccasins and that he couldn't make it there. He would quickly hand him different moccasins. So what's happened, what you can see that this is a reference tracking method. So we can see who's doing what. So here we have the proximate he, which we know is chickadee, would tell wolf, and wolf is marked as obviative. The S here marks it as obviative, that he wore out his. So we know the he and these are both marked proximative. Wore out moccasins, and that he, again, proximative, couldn't make it there. And then he here, being the obviative once again, would quickly hand him, I'll tell you in a minute what this inverse is, hand him, the approximative one, the moccasins. The moccasins are also obviative. So now what happens in these cases, when you have the proximative, this is also what we call a hierarchical kind of system, because the proximative is considered to be more important. So when the proximative is doing something to the obviative, that's the normal order. But if the obviative is doing something to the proximative, then it's considered inverse. And so there's a special marker on the verb that marks this as inverse, because in these two, it's the chickadee telling the wolf something, whereas in this one, it's the wolf doing something to the chickadee. And so then the sentence takes on this inverse marker. And so this is an interesting way that they keep track of who does what to whom. I worked on a language, the Dulong language that I mentioned earlier. They also have an inverse system. They don't have two different pronouns, but they have a way, if you're a first person working on doing something to a second person, that's direct. But if it's second person doing something to a first person, or third person doing something to a first person, then it's inverse. So then you have to have an inverse marker, because there's like a natural hierarchy of who should be doing what to whom. And if it goes against that, then you have the inverse marker. So these are all kind of deictic elements that are totally based on this, the speech situation, who's doing what to whom in this particular situation. Green also mentions metaphorical uses of pronouns. What she means here is that sometimes the referent we intend to identify when we use a pronoun is not the actual thing we're pointing out, but something related to it, such as when we point to a newspaper in order to refer to the company that produces the newspaper. This is more correctly called metonymic rather than metaphorical use. So this is very much like the example I gave of I almost bought that in downstairs for $15 because that there doesn't refer to the movie Casablanca, but the DVD of the movie Casablanca. Or I had a weird example. One time I was in B's office, and all of a sudden she just pointed at a box of chocolate and said, "Do you know she's leaving?" I was like, "What?" And she was pointing the box of chocolates. Somehow she thought that I knew who had given her the box of chocolates. And so she pointed to the box of chocolates as a reference to the woman who had given her the box of chocolates. But as I had no idea who had given her the box of chocolates, I had no idea who she was referring to. But people do this kind of stuff all the time. I mean, B is weird to begin with, but we kid her about that all the time. But this one was particularly strange. Okay, any questions about person Dijksys? Yes.
So for the fourth person
You need
system,
I can't go very far.
with regards to the fourth person system, would something like Japanese, where this distinction between proximal, medial, distal can also be used for third person, so kono hito, this person, sono hito, that person, ano hito, that person over there, would that count as kind of a fourth person thing?
In linguistics, it's normally not, because it's not like a fixed reference tracking system, but it does do the same thing. Yeah, so it's very good you saw that connection. Yeah, it is basically the same idea, but it's not a grammaticalized system the way this one is, where it's just a morpheme marked on the things. It's a demonstrative pronoun. Thanks. But that's a good question, yeah. So it is the same function. So you're trying to constrain the interpretation of which reference you're talking about using deictic conceptions of nearness or farness. So it's the same idea. Okay, any other comments or questions? Let me just take a little bit of a drink here. Okay. Okay, now we turn to place Dijksys. With place Dijksys, most languages distinguish proximal, again going close to the speaker, and distal, though many languages distinguish a third category, like Japanese kore, sore, are, and English we used to have that, like hither, thither, and yon. So yonder, it's the same root. Most languages grammaticalize these distinctions in demonstrative pronouns, but they can either be full freestanding pronouns like this and that, or they can be kind of affixes that attach to nouns. And there's also deictic adverbs of place, like here and here and there. Some languages also grammaticalize for number, like we say these instead of just this, we can say these and those. Some languages distinguish between visible and non-visible. So like in the Tibeto-Burman languages, some of the languages I work on in kind of Western China and Burma and Thailand, northwestern Thailand, some of these languages have, if they're in mountainous areas, there's often demonstratives that not only are about how far away, but whether it's up or down, and also whether it's visible or not. So this helps again with identifying the reference. So if I mention a referent and I know you can't see the referent, then I'm telling you, I use a particular pronoun that tells you that you can't see it, so don't bother looking for it. Or if I tell you it's one that's there up, or instead of there down, then you know which way to look for it. So in English, we can say overhead, up there overhead, or up high, or underneath, or something like that. But in some of these languages, it's just built right into their pronoun system. So like in Papua New Guinea, which again is all mountains, you can have 14 different pronouns based on height. In Chiang, one of the languages I worked on in northern Sichuan, I did field work in this. It's a very mountainous area. The village I worked in was at 3,200 meters high, 3,200 meters high, where the oxygen is not so rich. And you have to climb up this mountain, very steep mountain. And the village is hanging on the edge of a mountain, on the side of a mountain, and down below is a river. And so they have grammaticalized the demonstrative system that when you are speaking, you put a pronoun, you put a prefix on the verb. So here, the verb is actually just the L here. It's le. When it doesn't have a pronoun, it's pronounced le. But when you add the pronoun, the drops off. So it's just became like dal, zal, nal, al, hal, dal, sal, hal. So these these are required actually because they are relative to where you are standing when you speak. So whether you, like if I want to talk about, if I'm standing in the village where I did the field work, it's called Ronghong Village, and I want to talk about Chengdu, I have to talk about it, I have to use, if I say I'm going to Chengdu, then I have to use the directional prefix that's downriver, because Chengdu is downriver from there. But if I'm going to, say, Zhouzaigou, that's upriver, so then I have to use the upriver prefix. And so you really kind of have to know where you are when you're speaking all the time. It's quite an interesting system. And this is not unusual in that area. There's quite a lot of languages that have grammaticalized this sort of system. There's also spatial deixis in the lexicon, things like go and come, right? So go means to move away from the deictic center. Come means move towards the deictic center. Foreign means not part of the normal place. Home is a special kind of word. I don't know if you want to call that really deictic, but anyway, it does have a special kind of use and meaning. Local, when you talk about something being local, we're referring to a specific location. Indigenous, again. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes you can say to somebody, I'm coming to see you, right? So in that case, you're actually going to see the person in real life, but we use coming in that sense as a politeness. So that's what we call the shift of the deictic center. We take the hearer as the deictic center in that context, and it's seen as polite. A lot of languages do this. Walakanni, you can do that in Chinese as well. Wachukanni. It sounds weird to say wachukanni. Walakanni. So you can say I go. You can say I come see you, or versus he's coming. Where you say he's coming, then it's definitely towards the speaker. It's not the speaker moving away from where they are now. Where you say I'm coming, you're actually moving away from the thing. So it's the opposite of the usual use of coming. And sometimes there is this ambiguity between deictic and non-deictic use. So if you, let me see, let me do something here. Which one is screen one? I'm going to draw on here. If you have, can I do this? I don't know. I'm going to have to take everything off, I think, or at least take this off. Put it over here. If you have a house, and you say the children are in front of the building, how you understand that is going to depend on whether you're using it deictically or non-deictically, right? So or it could be both, actually. So if the children are standing here, you don't have to be good at drawing to be a good linguist, by the way. If your children are standing in front of the building, so we think of this as the front of the building, the face of the building, because that's where the door is. So if we say this, then it's kind of ambiguous because unless we know where the speaker is. If the speaker is here, then the children are both deictically in front of the building, but also in front of the face of the building. But if instead the children are, if the children are here and the speaker is here, looking at the children, so in this case, it can only be deictically in front of the building. So they're not in front of the face of the building. In other words, they're not the kind of standard reference point of front of the building, but they're in front of the building relative to the speaker. You get that? So, so that's the deictic use. And if you say it's not safe to stand behind the horse, if you have, I'm not really good with horses. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it either, but let's see, this is tail. So it looks more like a dinosaur than a horse. But if you're standing, if you're over here and you're standing on this side of the horse as opposed to this side of the horse, right? So if I'm the speaker and I'm looking this way, then he's behind the horse. But this is a different kind. This is like the front of the building. He's behind the horse, in other words, in not such a good location to be with the horse. But maybe there's some reason for being behind the horse there that's also not safe. So this would be the deictic one. This would be the non-deictic one, just like with that one. Is everybody clear on that? Oh, put this back on. Okay, so any questions about place Dijksys? So time Dijksys, the last bit here is time Dijksys encodes temporal points or spans relative to the time of the utterance. So it could be the coding time, when you say something or write something, but it may be different from the speaking time. So like if you write a note that says, I'll be back in 2 hours, again, if you put down the time, then at least the person knows when the coding time, so-called coding time was, but you don't know when the receiving time will be. It's like, a letter in a bottle thrown in the ocean. And time can be thought of in a couple of different ways, not necessarily just 2 ways, but 2 ways are common. Both of them get lexicalized in languages. Time is either seen as flowing from the future to the past a constant world. So like we're standing still and time is flowing by really quickly. So like in Latin you say tempus fugit, time is flying but past us. As in the coming week. So in an older way in China, you also say 来年. Next year was 明年 is 来年. They used to say 来年. So it's coming, the coming week, the coming month, or the weeks gone by. Boy, those weeks went by. We can say that those weeks went by really quickly. Or in terms of being constant as the world. So the other way of looking at it is in terms of time being constant, and the world, us basically passing from the past to the future. So the week ahead, I'm looking forward to the week ahead as I get to it. Time Dijksys is usually grammaticalized as deictic time adverbs, such as now, then, yesterday, today, this year, and in some languages by tense marking. Temporal Dijksys usually conceptualizes analogous to spatial Dijksys. In other words, we use the same words very often, like front and forward and back, so back, of course, comes from literally back. And so you go back in time is the same thing as I put it behind my back. And so very often the terms used are the same, like this week, next year, 前天, the day before yesterday in Chinese, 后天, the day after yesterday. We can say one event is ahead or behind another in time. This is an example that just to show how the conception in older Chinese, that they think of the past as, so what they talk about from the time of the North-South dynasties and on up. So they think of the past as up and the present, the future as down, or after that reference point. So in this case, they're taking the North-South dynasties or the Jin dynasty as the reference point. So everything earlier than that is up and everything later than that is down. So that's kind of a different thing, because in other cultures, they might say down is back, or use some other metaphor entirely for the earlier time. And then there are some cultures like the Aymara in South America, their future is behind them. So they would gesture backwards for the future. So every society can metaphor, it's all basically a metaphor. And in some language, in Papua New Guinea, there's a language where the time goes up and down. And Chinese, some people talk about, 上个星期, 下个星期, up, up week, down week. So it's also that kind of metaphor where you can go up and down, you can go left and right. If you watch the Dijksys video that I put on the Blackboard, she talks about the difference in conception of time of some cultures. So time can move in different directions. So in the lexicon, we have, as I mentioned, words like now, then, today, yesterday, tomorrow, I'm going there Tuesday. So Tuesday, a word like Tuesday can be used deictically also. If I say, okay, let's meet Tuesday, that has to mean this Tuesday coming up, the next Tuesday. See, the problem is if you put in the word next, it gets confused. A lot of people confuse when you put in next. Because for some people, next means not this coming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that one. Whereas for some people, they say next Tuesday, it means this first Tuesday we're going to come to this week or something. So it gets very confusing. But if you just say Tuesday, and what they will do in Australia is they'll say Tuesday week means not this Tuesday, but a week from this Tuesday. So in other words, next Tuesday. So they avoid using next. But Tuesday, the word Tuesday is used deictically when you just say, let's go Tuesday, because it has to mean the Tuesday next, the most immediate. Like if today is Friday, then Tuesday means Tuesday of the next week. And then as I mentioned earlier, that when we have tense, it does constrain our interpretation to past. But as I mentioned in my first lecture, the difference between I've had lunch and I've been to the mainland, there's a big difference in interpretation there because of what we know about real-world knowledge and how people eat and how people travel. Here's just another nice use of these words in temporal Dijksys, where Winnie the Pooh, another thing that you must absolutely read if you don't have a deprived childhood. Good morning, Christopher. Oh, no. What is it? It's tomorrow. And Winnie the Pooh, very, very smart bear, says, it's usually today. And Christopher Robin says, yes, of course it's today, but that means that means I've slept here and I'm supposed to be in the office. So, and then later on, Winnie the Pooh says, Christopher Robin, what day is it? Christopher Robin says, it's today. And Winnie the Pooh says, oh, my favorite day. And then Christopher Robin says, mine too, Pooh, mine too. So if today is your favorite day, that means every day is your favorite day. That's a good thing. And that's a Pooh. There's actually a book called The Tao of Pooh, because Poohist philosophy is really great stuff. And I'm a Taoist, so I love Pooh. It's really a good book, and it's a serious book. It's not a joke. Definite descriptions can also be used deictically. So the man drinking champagne is my brother. When you're using it not to refer to specifically, somebody drinking champagne. I mean, it doesn't matter whether he's drinking champagne or not. You're using it just to point somebody out. So you're kind of in a context where you can see the person and you're kind of pointing them out. And then that can be also seen as deictic. The man who can lift this stone is stronger than me, as again, if you're pointing it out. But all of these can be ambiguous because if they're read as descriptive, then it's different. Then it's not deictic, it's just descriptive. So we'll talk more about that next week. It's important to point out that in 8a, the description could be wrong, but the reference could succeed right away. So even if he's not drinking champagne, as long as I point out the right person, the reference could be correct, as long as you identify that person. And the same thing with the man who can lift this stone is stronger than me, the Smith's murder is insane. So there's two interpretations possible. One depends on the speaker's the intention and the addressee's successful location of the intended referent, and not on the correctness of the description. So, if you have an idea of who Smith's murderer is, then you're using it more like deictically. Whereas if you're just saying whoever it is that murdered Smith, then you're not using it deictically. Most definite referring expression can be used for either speaker reference or semantic reference, so-called semantic reference. But really, it's all about inferring the speaker's intention in what they're saying. The interpretation of these definite MPs is also context sensitive, like the door is open. So if I say the door is open, well, which door? In the context here, well, we actually have two doors, but it could be either one of these, but it's going to be something relevant, some relevant door. It isn't that there's just one door, but there's only one relevant in the context usually. And whenever we say something about some group, it's always relevant to some context. And so that's relevant to a particular speech act situation. And the context can also be the linguistic context, which acts as to encourage the hearer to interpret the expression in a particular way. Either explicitly, like in John bought a refrigerator and just a day later the refrigerator wouldn't close. But normally we would just say John bought a fridge and just a day later the door wouldn't close. So we can identify the door because we just mentioned fridge and we know that most refrigerators have doors. They wouldn't work so well if they didn't have a door. So we can identify the door as the door of the fridge. So referring is not something that's done by people with terms. It is something that's done by people with terms. It's not the things. It's not the terms themselves that do the referring. The speaker refers by using some form, and the role of the expression depends less on the syntactic or semantic category of the expression itself than it does on the speaker and the context and the presuppositions of the speaker in that context. So the bottom line that we're going to get to in all of this is it's really about using abductive inference to infer the intention of the speaker in using whatever form it is in that particular way. Okay, we're already kind of over time, but so I'll stop here. Now let me just finish this section. So because deictics encode many aspects of the circumstances surrounding an utterance within the utterance itself, natural language utterances are then anchored directly to aspects of the context. Now this is an important role that Dijksys have. They're anchoring what we're talking about to the situation. We have no way of evaluating the truth value of a sentence containing a deictic expression without reference to the context in which it is uttered. So this is why those things, like those sentences that you probably learned about in semantics class with truth values, T and F, it's just sentences out of context. You can't really give them truth values unless you know the whole context in which they were used. And also the speaker's intentions in using them. That is, they're not grammatically or semantically ambiguous, but pragmatically ambiguous. One consequence of this is that the usual view in logic that sentences can be divided up into predicates, logical operators, and referring expressions, and that this can fully represent the meaning of a proposition, is generally not true. one cannot always assign a referential function to a definite description in isolation from a particular occasion on which it's used. So the whole foundation of logic actually is problematic, unfortunately. And also a certain type of philosophy that's very popular now is also kind of problematic because it's based on this idea that you can identify the truth of a sentence out of context. So if I say something like, I'm in room TR plus 45 now, until you know who said it and when, you don't know whether it's true or false. It could also mean my class. So when I use I could mean I meaning this body, this person. I could also mean I is my class. So I am in room TR plus 45 could mean my class is in room TR plus 45 now. Or it could be something else. Or I could say I'm in parking lot B, right? So I could say my car is in parking lot B. I could use I to refer to my car. The meaning of indexicals involves speaker intention. So I can be me, it can be my class, it can be my car, it can be all kinds of things. So it's not really that easy without knowing the actual intention of the speaker in using the form. You can't really understand what's going on. So my book, if I say, oh, my book got published, or I left my book on the table, the expression my book can mean different things in different contexts, though it should bear some contextually salient relation to the speaker. But it depends on my intention. So it could be a book I wrote. It could be a book I just bought. It could be something that he's going to give to me yet, but he hasn't given it to me yet. There's all kinds of ways that it could be. And so it's up to you to infer the speaker's intention in using it. Green makes this point on page 18 where she talks about it's raining and the use of the historical present. The addressee has to guess at the intended referent. And she also uses the example of pointing at pointing at a sugar jar, and then what are you pointing at exactly? What are you talking about when you do that? Okay, so we'll talk about relativized Dijksys and other things later. Any questions before we end for today? No? Yeah.
I have a few questions, but I could ask them tomorrow if you're concerned about time.
Well, it's just if everybody has things to do, I'm okay. But do you want it? Well, it's fresh.
So towards the beginning, I think in your introduction, you had a comic about a time machine. It was black and white. I was wondering if the ambiguity or the misunderstanding here was actually not only with the slider of now, but also with the interpretation of go. So when do you want to go, as in at what point do you want to leave, or to what point do you want to travel?
Oh. Can you read? Yeah, when do you want to go, meaning what time do you want to go to? Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, I didn't read it that way, but yeah, you could get that, sure. Oh, that's why. That's actually the whole thing. Yeah, you're right. Jesus. Face palm, Yeah, that's what it is. When do you want to go? Right now, but you're already there. Where? Right now. So yeah, okay. So all this time I've been misunderstanding this thing. You got it right. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Then another thing for space, I was wondering, would the phrase in town be also lexically deictic? So if you say someone's in town based on whether you are also in town, does that?
Yeah. Well, in this case, yeah, because if you say he's in town, then it implies you're not in town, right? Well, no, if you're in town, you could say he's also in town. So that's Nightdactic in that sense. But when you say town, it's almost like Tuesday. It has to refer to a specific town, right? At least in that context. Again, it depends on your particular context, how you're using it. So there are contexts where there can be. Yeah.
One more question about time. In Chinese, if you say to someone, wait a while, you can say 等一下, right? Is the 一下 that idea of time being down, like the future being down, or is it something else?
I never thought of it that way, but it just usually means it's usually thought of as a short period of time. Like you say, 坐一下 means sit for a little while, you know. So I don't, 一下. Yeah, I never thought about that. But maybe the original metaphor was something that comes down. I don't know. Yeah, nobody's ever looked at that. So there you got a paper if you want to try to look that up. So,
Thank you.
all right. Any other comments or questions? Anybody else have an idea about xia in Chinese?
I'm not very sure, but I think I would understood that Isha is something like a business, like just a shop.
Isha means, oh, like that. So this is also Isha. Yeah. So Daisha. Yeah. 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 Ta Isha. Ah, that could be also. So Isha means like your hand comes down once. That's good. Thank you. Anything else? This is meant to be a seminar, but it's difficult in this room, and it's also difficult with our faces being bound up in these things. But okay, if nothing else, then that's all for today. Thanks.